The Toronto Maple Leafs have dropped their last two games, and secondary scoring is a big reason. David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs joins us to discuss that and what the Leafs are looking to as we get closer to the trade deadline. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti, and little tough time for the Leafs the last couple of games, losing to Washington and Pittsburgh. What was the biggest reason in your mind for these last two losses?
I think it's twofold. Bad starts, really kind of slow out of the gate, and then just all the offense hasn't been there, right? They've been getting goals from their top guys. They haven't been getting much offense from the players below the top lines, and that's been something that's been a trouble for this team all season. And they kind of were getting by because their defense was holding the fort, and their goaltending was doing pretty well. Last two games they played teams have got a bit more offensive firepower, and that's made it a little tough for them, right? But I really do think it's the slow start. The other team has been able to establish good zone time, and at least haven't been able to get that rhythm offensively.
How do you think they address the slow starts?
Well, I think it just comes to getting your top players. I know that it would be one thing to get your depth to step up, but I think it starts with the top players kind of getting the team off to a good start, and then everybody else kind of falls in line, right? Like what they did a couple games ago against Nashville, they didn't score for the first two periods. They put Matthews and Marner back together. Eureka, they scored 3 goals within 5 minutes. But that should have just been a short-term pairing together. I really do think they need to split Matthews and Marner apart, not because they can't play together. It's the impact it has on the rest of the lineup. If you were to separate them, now you can balance things out a little bit, and teams are not going to choose to just go after Matthews and Marner. They have to now account for the rest of the lineup. And there's a trickle-down effect when you do that. So my hope is that when the lineups come out, when the line rushes for practice come out starting this week, those two aren't together. That I think has to be the first thing, is you got to separate it, and you got to stop taking penalties. They have been taking too many penalties, and when your penalty kill is spending a lot of time there, your stars aren't playing a lot. Even though the stars do play on the penalty kill, they're not out there to go and drive you offense on the penalty kill. They're there to help kill the penalties. So I think that's another issue that they have to sort out.
Max Pacioretty activated off LTIR. What, if any, impact do you think he'll have on the secondary scoring and on the lineup in general?
Well, he's been a good addition this year. It took him some time, but he has started to find himself a bit of a role, right? Physical presence, more physical than I expected. The amount of hits this guy throws out there. And then he was getting some nice chemistry. There was a line with him, Tavares, and Nylander that were really gelling before he got hurt. That if the Leafs are adamant on keeping Matthews and Marner together, maybe that's a trio you bring back. Personally, I think that the Tavares Pacioretty combo does work quite well. It's that third player. Who are you going to have on that line, right? And so what I like about Pacioretty is he's smart, and he doesn't have to play a lot to be effective. And that's something you want to see from a depth player, right? He doesn't have to play, 16, 17 minutes. He could play those 12 minutes and still be still be an impactful player. But what I would like to see from him, a little more shooting. This Leafs team needs players that are going to be more willing to shoot, because there are times they're going for that extra pass. They're being what Craig Berube likes to call too cute. Craig Berube does not like cute hockey, and so I think a guy like Pacioretty, I think they're going to need to see more. He has 25 shots in 14 games, so it's not like he hasn't been shooting the puck, but he should be shooting the puck more. He has been known to be a goal scorer. I think he needs to pick that up again.
They had just announced the rosters last week for the Four Nations tournament. The Leafs pretty well represented, but one player who was not was John Tavares. Do you think this was a snub of Tavares? And then overall, are you pleased with the Leafs representation in the tournament?
The main guys are there, right? Matthews, Marner, Nylander, pretty much leading their countries. I was surprised with Hakanpää, not because I don't think he's a good player, but because of his injuries. He's still dealing with the knee injury. He had a little bit of an operation that I guess he did it now, so that if he does want to go play Four Nations, he can. Tavares, that was a tough one. Canada is such a tough team to make. And yeah, there are some players that are very deserving to be there. But when I look at especially what Tavares has been able to do this year, he's picked up the slack when Matthews was hurt. Him and Marner, I would have thought you've got a pairing right there in Marner and Tavares for Team Canada. Then you throw whoever you want on the left wing there. I thought that would have made so much sense, because in a tournament like this, you need chemistry. So Marner could play with anyone. I get that. But if you already have Tavares and you can put whoever you want on that left wing, kind of would make an easy job for John Cooper and his staff. So I just think Tavares has played so well this year. He played well at the World Championship. He missed out on his chance when he got hurt in 2014 in the Olympics, and that for him, he doesn't have many opportunities to represent Canada anymore. And I think he is still a game breaker. He can play in different situations. I know maybe they don't see him as a penalty killer, but he can play in those late games. He's good on the faceoffs. He's sound. He's played very well defensively. I personally, that was the snub for me for the Leafs, is not having Tavares there.
So, the Leafs are one of those perennial playoff teams right now. And as we head into December toward the Christmas holiday, what are your early indications as to what the Leafs will be looking to do when we get closer to the trade deadline?
I think, depth is going to be key. Do they go out and maybe add another defenseman if they feel like they just want to make sure they're all solidified there? Injuries with Jake McCabe, missing some time. Chris Tanev has been the healthiest one of the healthier defensemen, but we know his history is not exactly squeaky clean. But I do think up front they need to go and find, like, Fraser Minton's done such a great job as a third line center. If he can continue this way, then maybe you can pivot a little bit. You don't have to go find that center, but I think you need to find someone to play with a Fraser Minton. They need more physicality. I think in that they need a bigger body, a guy that's going to be able to, help a young player like Fraser Minton, open up some space for him. And I think Nick Robertson, he's a player that I thought could at least thrive in a depth scoring role. It hasn't happened. So maybe you find an upgrade on that. I think they need to find some depth scoring and just a bit more of a bigger body power, again, almost like a power forward that could play up and down the lineup.
Anyone in particular who you think they may be focusing on, or it's still a little too early?
I still think it's a little too early, because there's probably some teams that figure, hey, maybe we can keep the window open a little bit more. But one player I will say, and he's come up in talks before, is Brock Nelson. I know he's a center. He's more of a top six guy, but you put a Brock Nelson lower in your lineup, the way he's been able to produce, I think he's the type of scorer and center that this team could need, because you lose a Tavares or a Matthews, your center ice position looks a little bleak, right? So I think if you go out and add a Brock Nelson, it solidifies your center ice position. And so that's a potential move you can make there. I just don't know who else right now would be available, that because they're so hard to find, like that power forward type. Not many players are available now. Well, they won't be available until a little later, but I am very curious if they can find that maybe a little earlier. I don't want to. The Leafs like to get things done a little bit earlier, but it does take some time for those trades to work out.
No doubt about it. Well, David, I'm sure you'll have your finger on the pulse of the Leafs the rest of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find myself on X at @D_Morisuti. And yeah, follow the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. And you can make sure you can also subscribe, follow us on X at Locked On Leafs.
All right, David, thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Gil.
I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold to break up with my old provider. Go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl to get started. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You could use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month. $45 upfront payment required. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.